Hello, Zero Books readers. It's me again, Douglas Lane. And in this video, I'll be considering conspiracies and capitalist realism.
This version tracks the limousine and maintains President Kennedy and Governor Connally at center frame. This version is only in slow motion.
Eugene Thacker has written that the evil demon in Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy, this idea that there might be a malevolent God who's constantly deceiving us about the world. Thacker thinks that this figure is enough to topple or discredit all philosophical inquiry. But for me, Descartes' assertion, I think therefore I am, seems really solid, like a knockdown argument. And when I start to doubt the substance of my life, when I start to worry about who I am or how I know my place in the world, I think of Descartes. I think, therefore I am. However, when I recall my life, when I consider all that thinking that I've done, I find that for the most part, it's other people who've been doing my thinking for me.
The multiple conspiracy model, and it makes more sense to me than the idea that there are no conspiracies, which is nonsense, because anybody who's ever worked for a corporation, those corporations conspire all the time, politicians conspire all the time, pot dealers conspire not to get caught by the narcs. The art world is full of conspiracies. Conspiracy is natural primate behavior. But there is no one conspiracy smart enough to run everything. If there was, the world would start to make sense.
The resignation of Troy Price, former chair of the Iowa Democratic Party, comes along with allegations of at least the appearance of cronyism and a comment from Judy Downs, the executive director of the Polk County Democrats, that some of Price's decisions just made it really hard to defend against accusations of cronyism or conspiracy, frankly. Despite the objections of many pundits, it seems clear that the Iowa Democratic Party, under the direction of Price and then Tom Perez, conspired to undermine the Sanders campaign and to fix the results in favor of Pete Buttigieg. While the malfunctioning app can be put down to incompetence, the slow rollout of votes over several days, the decision to release results from precincts that favored Buttigieg first, the refusal to correct errors even after they were reported on by precinct captains and the New York Times, along with the announcement of a Buttigieg victory on CNN, when the AP, the New York Times, and even the news department of CNN all refused to report a conclusive winner due to those errors, cannot be excused away as innocent mistakes, but are instead evidence of deliberate manipulation or of systemic bias, or both. The Iowa Democratic Party and the DNC have both exposed themselves as corrupt, and in the aftermath, it's tempting to fall into the prevailing ideology of American politics. That is, it's tempting to believe in the conspiracy theory version of history. Even though the system is rigged, the dice are loaded, and the fight is fixed, most, if not all, of our problems would remain, even if the Democrats and Republicans were as pure as driven snow. To focus on corruption and conspiracies as the source of our social problems, or even as the source of our political dysfunction, is to misunderstand the relationship between cause and effect. In the case of Iowa, we should ask ourselves not whether the Democratic Party is corrupt, but why it is that the political parties in the United States are designed so that this sort of corruption is not only possible, but permissible, or even encouraged.
Donald Trump's victory. Donald Trump is not the cause of all of our problems, and we're making a mistake when we act like he is.
That's right.
He is a symptom of a disease that has been building up in our communities for years and decades, and it is our job to get to the harder work of actually curing the disease.
U.S. political parties are private associations that can, for the most part, determine, change, or even violate their own internal rules during the nominating process. The U.S. Constitution protects their right. It protects the right of all Americans to free expression and free association. The aim of the First Amendment is to protect individual liberty and to empower civil society. However, a problem arises from this division between the state and business on the one hand and the private realm of everyday life on the other. The problem is this: the realm of everyday life is structured by the social relations that mediate business relations and the state. In fact, without the realm of commerce and the state, there could not be such a thing as civil society, no such thing as everyday life. And the reverse is also true. When I was a kid, maybe 13 years old, I wanted to be the greatest American hero. Now, if you remember the 80s, you'll know that I'm not just referring to any American hero, but a particular one. You remember that show, The Greatest American Hero? That actor who played the role? Well, when I consider him now, you think about him in today's lingo, he's sort of a cuck. In Marx's essay On the Jewish Question, Marx put our dilemma this way. Quote, "Man was not freed from religion, but received religious freedom. He was not freed from property. He received freedom to own property. He was not freed from the egoism of business. He received freedom to engage in business." The Democratic Party has constitutionally protected rights. The party has the right to create, change, and violate its own rules for selecting a nominee for president. Bourgeois freedom works this way. In the process of establishing the right to free association, a right that the state cannot impinge upon, the state ends up protecting powerful state interests from those who have been unlucky in business and politics. In our free market society, nothing one needs is free, but everything has a price. In the realm of politics, there are no prohibitions limiting political organization. Anyone can seek power, but to get the power, you have to have either money and or political power from the start, or gain favor with those who do. Bourgeois equality requires inequality. Our freedom as individuals requires our collective power be held in chains. For instance, everyone has the constitutionally protected right to free expression, and anyone with an internet connection can potentially reach millions. But the real power isn't in the hands of those individuals, but rather is held by those firms that have accumulated the most capital. I really can't stand Baby Yoda. Mark Fisher, in his book Capitalist Realism, described his core concept. He described capitalist realism this way. Capitalist realism is not a particular type of realism. It is more like realism in itself. As Marx and Engels themselves observed in the Communist Manifesto, capital has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism in the icy water of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of the numberless, indefeasible chartered freedoms, has set up that single unconscionable freedom, free trade. In one word, for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions, it has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. Fisher comments on Marx and Engels' observation this way: capitalism is what is left when beliefs have collapsed at the level of ritual or symbolic elaboration, and all that is left is a consumer spectator, trudging through the ruins and the relics. When I was a little kid, like 5, 6 years old, I used to dream about this cartoon character named Timer. Probably none of you will remember this thing, but it was this little blob that was part of a campaign of public service announcements. And I used to dream about him, this yellow blob in a top hat, and he would appear at the beginning of my sleep cycle, right when I was falling asleep, maybe into a REM state. There he would be, pop, and he'd go, "Time for Timer. You're about to be in dreamland." And then in the morning, when I was about to wake up, I was having maybe a nightmare or just a dream, there'd be again, pop, "Time for Timer. Time to wake up." I don't know what that means.
Hi, time for Timer, and time to
Capitalism
make a supply of health.
isn't just what is left behind when all illusions are stripped away. Rather, it is what you live with when the source of religious illusion, the material reality that creates religious delusion, still remains. It is what you get when religion comes to earth and is materialized. In his book, The German Ideology, Karl Marx wrote, "The way in which men produce their means of subsistence depends, first of all, on the nature of the actual means of subsistence they find in existence and have to reproduce. This mode of production must not be considered simply as being the production of the physical existence of the individuals. Rather, it is a definite form of activity of these individuals, a definite form of expressing their life, a definite mode of life on their part. As individuals express their life, so they are. What they are, therefore, coincides with their production, both with what they produce and with how they produce it. The nature of individuals thus depends on the material conditions determining their production." We are creating our lives. We're creating the form that we use to organize our lives. And yet, this form of life was also something passed down to us. It's something we've inherited. So when we try to escape the structure of our lives, when we try to turn to, say, politics, say electoral politics as a way out, we find that it's ready to hand, but it is also already of the system that we're trying to dismantle. We can't help but reproduce the world as it already is. And yet there are no tools available to us that aren't produced by capital. Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.